What I wanted to talk about is how do I actually make my carvings. So you can see behind me I have a stone carving. This is a marble sculpture and it's about 3/4 of the way done. And oftentimes people see the finished work, they ask me like, well, how did you do this? What is this? How does this work? Because I'm taking a raw block of stone and I'm carving a polar bear. And so I thought I'd talk about my style of carving and kind of give an overview of how these are actually made. It's essentially the opposite of AI, as in artificial intelligence. It's rather AI as in art intelligence. I guess the first thing is the stone. Where do I get the stone? I carve, primarily these days, I'm carving soapstone, alabaster, and marble. And there are a few suppliers throughout North America, which is where I'm in Canada, and there's a few suppliers in Canada as well. But they're few and far between. There's not a lot. And they'll import the stone from Brazil, a lot of Brazilian soapstone, India, like marble imported from Italy, alabaster from Italy, from Spain, essentially from all over the world. So that you have these specific importers that sell the stone for artists to carve, and there's a few of them out there. Typically what I do is I have a supplier that I would go to their warehouse and I would pick the stones out. Basically, I would walk around the yard and I would look around and I would find and select stones that I would then carve. And I'll see a really cool stone. Sometimes it'll have the right shape. Like that would make a perfect bear. This would make a really cool owl. You know, this one could be a sleeping bear, or this one might be a cool sitting bear. And so I'll go with the shape. Other times it'll be the color. The color is just, too beautiful to pass up. And I think I have to figure out an idea for this piece. Or like sometimes I'll see a stone and it'll just really stand out to me and I won't really have a specific idea for it. I just will be like, I'll figure something out for this stone because it's so beautiful. And there's like a form of communication happening with me and this stone. And they're all in their raw state. Then I bring the piece back to my studio and I will decide, okay, I'm going to carve this what looks like a good piece for a bear. Let's just stick with the bears because that's what I mostly do. That's kind of my signature piece. So I get it on the table and I start looking around the stone and just sort of imagining how I could fit a bear inside this particular stone. And almost like you're projecting, like if you had a projector, a 3-dimensional projection, and I project into the stone and I kind of, I'll go through the stone when I first get it and see if there's any major cracks. That's another thing. Even when I'm at the warehouse, I'm checking, is there any major cracks that could be a problem? Oftentimes, like 90% of the times, the stones that I carve have cracks in them, and you just kind of work with it. Sometimes it creates some really beautiful color. You just have to work with that and make sure you design and your pose so that you don't end up having like a leg kind of running through a really prominent crack. Lots of times if I add bases to sculptures, it gives it more structural integrity, and that's something that I think about a lot in my design. How is this going to land in the collector's house? What if someone buys this from the UK or from China or from the US and I'm shipping overseas or across the country? Is it strong enough to make that trip? And a lot of times when you have a nice base on a piece, it sort of anchors everything and holds it all together really well. I do a process, what I've heard people call it direct carving. I don't know what if there's a name for it, but I will just sort of start drawing on the stone. I have lots of references on my phone, hundreds and hundreds of photos, where I'm gathering bits and pieces of information for the particular pose that I want to do. So I'm using my references a lot because I feel like I do like to have a nice naturalism to my work. I wouldn't consider myself a realist, but a naturalist I would consider myself. But I also like them to have a little bit of expression. So I'm not really just trying to do something realistic. It's got to be fun. It's got to have a little life, a little character to it. But I like a natural feel, something that's very natural. I do pay attention a lot to anatomy through having lots of references on hand while I'm carving. And I literally will just draw the bear or the pose and I will just start carving into the piece. Very direct. I don't have a model I'm working from. It's interesting because I feel like I'm heavily influenced by the Italian Renaissance sculptures. That was like my favorite genre when I was in art school. And when I first got interested in art, I loved Michelangelo and Bernini and all those old, the Greek sculptures. So I was really captivated by that style and that degree of realism. And so that definitely influences the work that I'm doing in my wildlife pieces. I don't work from models. So a lot of artists will have a model that they do first in clay, and then they'll use like this pointer machine, and basically they're transferring it over. I basically just carve direct. So like it's happening on the fly, and it's happening in front of me. So there is, if I cut off a piece of the stone, I can't put it back, kind of thing. People always ask me that too. Like, well, what if you cut off, what if you go too far? And the answer is, well, then you've gone too far, and maybe you have to adjust your design. The beauty about stone, one of the interesting things about stone is it forces you to work slowly because it's hard. It's a hard material, especially marble. Soapstone is a little softer and a little more sensitive to the grinding blade, so you can really take a lot of stone away very quickly if you're not careful. So it's important that when I'm working, I have my references that I'm using and I'm clear on the cuts that I'm making. I don't want to guess ever. I try not to guess when I'm carving. Make sure I'm specific and I know why I'm making a cut in a certain place and why it's that angle and how deep I have to go. And so you're sort of calibrating and calculating a lot of different angles at the same time as you work. And the direct carving method is pretty cool. I'll start from the face, and usually the face kind of emerges first, and then I'll kind of use that as a reference point to sort of start carving the rest of the body. And a lot of the times, like, I will start carving the face, and I don't really know what's going to happen down at the bottom of the carving yet. I might have an idea, especially with the bases. Lots of times it's like, I don't really know what's going to happen with the base yet. And we'll see when I get down to that area. So it's like very in the moment. It's like a combination of planned, but also leaving room for spontaneity, right? So yeah, my style is called direct carving. So I use a combination of grinders, die grinders, little, like all the way down to like a really fine needle point on my Dremel where I'm really carving in the eye details or the fur details. I use a lot of hand files, especially with Soapstone, where you can kind of slow things down and just use a hand file to take off small amounts of stone at a time. And then I sand it, and I go through about, depending on the stone, no less than 3 layers of sanding typically. Like Soapstone is the easiest to sand, I would say. And I sand it up to like a 400 or 600 grit. I just go through the different layers. And then once it's completely sanded, and I just don't sand the piece completely smooth either. I will leave texture in areas, especially around the face. I find it's easier to see those details in the face if you just leave a little bit of texture there. And then I will use a natural beeswax, and I'll melt the natural beeswax over the stone, and it brings out the natural color of the stone. And that's how I bring the color out. So I don't add any coloring or any paint or anything like that. That's the natural color of the stone that you see in the final piece. And it's enhanced or brought out or emphasized with the wax, or some people use oil, which I've used also, but I have been preferring to just use the natural beeswax these days. So it's a very hands-on process and a very slow process. And sometimes, like for this one, I started this one July 1st, and it is July 14th. So this is going to take me the better part of July. Well, maybe I'll just mention this briefly, because people do come into the gallery and they ask, well, how long did it take? And I said this one, I've been working on this for July, but I've been carving for 13 years. And before that, I studied painting and drawing for 15 years. I've been doing art for 30 plus years, basically my entire life. And that's how long it took me to develop my skill set and my ability to create something like this. So it is a very manual process, and I like it that way, especially in a world of AI. Like, I feel like I'm very fortunate to be creating this kind of art in a world of AI, because it's not, I'm not going to say it's not easily reproduced. That's not really the point. I feel fortunate because I feel like there is a trend, if you want to call it that, for people that want things that are more handmade and unique and original. And this is very, very handmade and hands-on and manual. There's really no tricks here. I'm just carving this based on my artistic experience and history and practice over the years, and learning to paint and learning to draw from life and go out and paint from nature and use references to create art. And now here I am sculpting in 3D, pulling all this information together, pulling all this knowledge, I guess, and this skill set that I developed over the years to do something like this. So it's the opposite of AI, I would suppose. So that's it. That's generally and typically how I make these stone sculptures. If you have any more questions about the process, about my journey as an artist, drop them in the comments. So thank you everyone for listening, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Cheers.